My name is Chief Aviation Maintenance Technician Ben Wingo. I've been in the Coast Guard for about 20 years. I served as a non-rate right after boot camp at Coast Guard Station Quileute River, and that's where the accident took place. It was the night of February 12th, and we ended up receiving a distress call from a sailboat known as a gale runner. So we made our way to the boathouse across the street. Got down there, got our gear on, and made our way to the boat and started getting underway. As soon as we cleared the boat basin, we were making our way down the river, and we were taking, looked like 10-foot rollers over the bow. Like in the river, which is normally sheltered from the surf. That was kind of something new for me. I'd never really experienced it. Kind of the first indication that this was going to be sporty. The coxswain maneuvered out and just hit it, and we started trucking through the surf, pounding through. And all I remember is just seeing white. It was obviously nighttime, but all I could see was just these white walls coming at us. And I remember we powered through, and I don't know why, but I remember feeling us drop on the backside. And I don't know why I did this, but I ended up counting in my head, and I remember thinking 1001, 1002, 1003, and then we dropped and hit. And then next thing I know, the next one was breaking on us, and we're pushing through it. And we're coming out the backside, and I could swear it was like a 3-second drop each time. And we took about 3 of those, and we finally made it through, and we crossed the bar. And we started, we began our search for the sailboat. The coxswain, BM2 Bosley, had me trying to use the searchlights on the roof of the coxswain flat to locate the island. And I'm not sure how much longer after I began my search with the searchlight, I saw a rock. The swell had dropped out, and at the bottom, right there in the trough, there was a rock, and I yelled, "Rock, starboard bow, 10 feet." And I think before I even got feet out of my mouth, we hit something. We hit the rest of the rock. At that point, somebody yelled "wave," and I remember looking left towards the port side, and next thing I know, I was hearing the wind, the diesel engines, and all of a sudden it was just quiet. And then my face slammed on something, and I instantly tasted blood. And next thing I know, I just remember being sucked backwards, like my arms were sucked backwards, and I was out of the water. And we had re-righted. The boat had taken a wave and rolled over the rock and popped back up. And at this point, everybody was still there on the boat. And I remember standing up straight and grabbing my straps and my surf belt. And during that roll, we must have been spinning, because when I put my surf belt on, my straps were straight as could be, but they were all twisted now. So as the boat rolled, I was somersaulting. And so at that point, everybody's still there on the boat, but confusion kind of set in. This is one of those new guy moments where they tell you to speak up, because we had, at this point now, I didn't quite know our position, but I knew we were in front of the island. And somebody had said something in regards to find the river bar. I believe it was BM2 Bosley said, find the river bar, find number 3. And then next thing I know, I don't remember a hit. I just remember laying there. I stood up, and the boat, I remember hearing the loud racket of the engines, like I was in the engine compartment, but I wasn't. I was on the boat, and the boat was now out of water. From what I was told later by investigators, the boat got hit from behind, hit a rock, and then pitch pulled over, and at some point ended up on the shelf. And I stood up, and I had one attachment point left on my surf belt, and I just was like, I'm by myself. And then the MK3, Matthew Schlemmy, he popped up on the other side, and he looked at me and he's like, "Are you okay?" And at that moment, I think he said something like "look out" or "get down" or "hold on." I can't remember the warning. But for some reason, I ducked behind what was called the air castle. I ducked behind that, and next thing I know, I was in the water, and the boat again re-righted, and as it re-righted, I felt myself being flung and then slammed back down on the deck of the boat. And I stood up, and then this time it was just me on the boat. I guess when we had come off that shelf was at the edge of that little cove and was being pushed back in. And as I noticed that the boat was going back into this, I saw somebody floating by. And I saw them waving. I could have swore I saw waving arms. But all the boat hooks, the K-Pop throw bags, life rings, nothing. Everything was just washed over. I didn't have anything to throw, anything to get them with. And by the time I thought of undoing my belt and running up there foolishly, I wouldn't have been able to do anything because being up this bow as high up as it was, they were out of sight. And I could have swore I remember them waving. I just kind of looked towards the bow and I realized the boat's really pointing up. And the keel is resting on a rock and there's a branch. I see a tree branch. And that immediately told me, well, I must be close to shore finally. I jump in and more or less kind of got a body surfed on accident towards the beach. And then made my way up off the beach under the tree line and found a place to sit down. At this point, I didn't know anybody was hurt. I didn't think anything like that had happened. I honestly thought in my head like they just kind of floated around. We have our life vest, we have our survival gear, we have our Mustang suits that we're wearing. They're pretty buoyant. I just thought that they would just somehow pop back up in the river. At some point, I saw the helo from Port Angeles. I could hear the noise, the distinct sound of the 65. Way off. They were way off in the distance, but. I popped my 124. I started swinging that, and I guess at the time I didn't realize it. I thought that they had just kind of located all of us, and I figured everybody just kind of ended up like me, just a different spot. Maybe made it around to the beach. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna get picked up off this island. And then a short while later, I look back up, and the helicopter's back, and I see a group of people making their way across the island, top of the island, and all of a sudden I see this guy, he's rappelling down. He's got his gear on, the climber harness, and he's doing the whole thing with the rope. He's just rappelling down, and he's like, all right, stay here, they're gonna get you a harness. And I'm like, I'll be okay, I don't need a harness, I'm good. And he's like, no, you need a harness to get out of here. I'm like, no man, I'm good. And he goes, well, stay here. And he starts rappelling down towards the beach. And he looks up at me and he asks me, he kind of shouts a little bit over the wind. He's like, hey, is this some of your gear? And I make my way down and he goes, no, stay there. You don't need to see, it's not that important. I'm like, you're asking me a question, I can't see anything. I want to tell you what it is. And he's like, well, stay there. It's not safe. And I'm just walking down the hill, climbing down the hill, and he gets there and he's just looking at me like with these what are you doing? And I kind of duck down. I can kind of see under the branch, and that's where I saw BM2 Bosley. He was laying face down on the rocks. And that's kind of when I was like, oh, this is going to be a rough one. Now it's starting to dawn on me that people might be hurt or dead. And I get on board, I get in the basket, the swimmer tells me to do the old hands and feet in and just sit tight. Flight mech gets me to the door and he starts to bring the basket in, taps the deck, points to the deck. I hop out, sit there, and then he points to the chair, I hop on the chair. He stows the gear and he gets me buckled in, and then he grabs my hand. And that was where I really knew it was I'm eventually, coming off the adrenaline, and that's where I started to realize that, oh man, it's really bad. So the 60, they transit to the softball field next to the station, and they land. Flight mech gets me out of the rotor arc, and there's an ambulance waiting, and they get me into the ambulance, and there's a flight surgeon from Port Angeles there, and he's looks me over and he says, there's a lot of people want to see you. And so he just checks me out and he goes, how are you okay? You can walk, you're fine. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, you're operating on adrenaline right now. It's going to come down and it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. So be prepared. And I'm like, okay. And I get to the state, so we basically just kind of drove forward about 100 feet, and I get out of the ambulance and walk to the station, and people come out, they're hugging me and we're hugging, and I walk up the steps and there's BM1 John Placido, now retired CW04 John Placido, but at the time BM1. And when this guy was tough. He was awesome, but not the kind of person you ever pictured hugging you. And when he hugged me, that was the end of it for me. That was where it got tough. Shortly after that, I say my hellos and I'm okay, and I sit down with Captain Volk and Master Chief LaForge, and they sat there and they asked me a quick question, and they go, "How are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm as good as I can be, well as I can be." And they go, "What do you remember?" And I told them everything. They just sat there looking at me going, "Would you be able to do that again?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll be able to do that." And so after that, I showered up, and that flight surgeon was not joking. After that hot shower, everything settled. I felt like I had just taken a ride in a dryer. I was beat up. I was sore. My nose was snapped and bent. I had a gash above my left eye. I had torn a muscle in my calf, and just took a beating. I found out after the shower, after everything, that the crewman, my roommate Clint Minikin, he had washed up on the shore sometime after 1 a.m., right around the time I made it into the cove. And Schlemmy had passed at some point and washed into the same cove where I was at, where Bosley ended up as well. The other crewman, my roommate, Clint Minikin, he was, they were all hard on me, but hard on me in a good way. It wasn't like hazing or anything crazy like that, but there was a lot no nonsense. That was, if you don't do this, you're gonna really hear about it. And he, as his roommate, I wouldn't say that he took me under his wing, but he definitely schooled me up, got me through my syllabus, because it was one more person in duty, in the duty pool, and it was also less watch you had to stand, but he also was probably getting grief from everyone else for not getting me trained up faster. But he was sharp and knew his business. And I remember thinking, I don't think I've ever spoke to anybody who knew so much about a topic. And he was a non-rate. And looking back on that now, that was kind of like the model that I would say that I've emulate, where make sure you know your craft. And he knew everything about being a crewman. There wasn't a question that I couldn't ask and he didn't have the answer to, which I was really impressed with. BM2 Bosley, he was a pretty cool guy. I would say he's more laid back than the others. You could tell, when we were out on the boat, the way he described things wasn't so rigid and militaristic. It was, try it this way, man, or see what works. But he was had more of a laid back approach, and was a good guy. This one's going to be tough right here. Matthew Schlemmy, the MK3, he was the engineer on the boat. Probably said some of the funniest stuff I've ever heard, and I still repeat it to this day. Really sharp, really nice guy, would sit down and talk with you. One of the first petty officers that actually took the time to sit down and ask questions and get to know me. A funny story about him, though, not so much about him, but I went recruiting, and I got orders to recruiting office St. Louis, and I was there with a fellow recruiter one day. We were driving around, and he was showing me the St. Louis area, and there was a sector Upper Mississippi, and then there was the waterfront where all the river tenders were. And he took me down there to show me show me around, introduce me to some people, and drive up to this building, and I see this name on the building, and I'm like, thought, oh man, and it said Matthew E. Schlemme, and I forgot that he was from Missouri, and they had a building named the Matthew E. Schlemme building, named after him. We stop and we get out, and I get up, and there's this whole plaque, whole beautiful dedication there, right there on the waterfront and on the Mississippi River, and I was like, wow, this is pretty incredible. I couldn't believe the coincidence. I just had forgotten about that he was from Missouri, and well, a couple years later, I ended up promoting to chief, advancing to chief, and that's where I got to have my ceremony, and that was really special. I feel the Enlisted Memorial is important for a number of reasons. One, because not a lot of people think of the Coast Guard as dangerous. I myself remember leaving for boot camp, and my stepmom even said to me, she goes, well, at least you're joining the Coast Guard because it's safe. And I remember thinking about that statement the night I was sitting on that cliff. And years later, it dawned on me, as I'm studying for EPME for the service-wide, that I'm seeing all these previous people that had died in service, and they were all enlisted, of course, and all we ever knew of in boot camp was, Douglas Monroe, and that is a big one, and it's quite important, but but we didn't have anything other than just a few posters, from what I understood, at Cape May about him, like a couple pictures, maybe a plaque, but but if we were to, I learned about names like Mike Sexton and Joshua James, you see what these guys did and how they went, they definitely deserve, and everyone else, Nate Bruckenthal, they all deserve something. Improvements to safety for the surf boat community. But I think it also serves as a good reminder for when when the swell starts picking up and the surf season starts wherever you're at, in the United States, that it's a good time to have a good safety stand down and tell that story, because it was a tragic event. The 44-foot Monroe lifeboat, we've never lost one until that night, and it's just one thing. It's a lesson in CRM. It's a lesson in knowing your environment, knowing what hazards that are out there, and familiarity, and just in general taking that sort of stuff for granted. And I feel that this story is a testament to when something can go wrong, everything will go wrong.